Welcome to Rio de Janeiro.
I'm in the isolated mountains of the Chodu River Valley in eastern Turkey.
I'm in Melbourne, Australia, the self-proclaimed sports capital of the world.
As a designer, I have traveled the globe investigating amazing feats of architecture.
Of all the times I've heard "don't look down," this is the one that I'm really being serious about.
You're praying for me?
That's always an encouraging sign.
Here we go. I'm now 1,000 feet from the surface, 2,000 feet. I'm now deeper than the Grand Canyon. I'm now almost at 8,000 feet. And I'm standing at the deepest point on planet Earth. I think this is the most incredible thing I've ever done in my life. My name is Danny Forster, and this is Build It Bigger.
Give it up for Danny Forster.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Michael. Hi, everyone. My name is Danny Forster, and as Michael said, I'm really happy to be back here, and was really happy to keynote the first HotelSpaces 3 years ago, and thrilled to be back here. And as Michael said, and the video showed you, for a number of years, I had the wonderful opportunity to host a show called Build It Bigger on the Discovery Channel, where I got to go to about 65 different countries, and in each place investigate amazing feats of architecture, engineering, and construction. This is a project designed by Zaha Hadid in Baku, Azerbaijan. Been to great places like Santiago de Compostela. This is the city of culture designed by Peter Eisenman. And this is one of the longest cable stay bridges in the world in Hong Kong. This is the Stonecutters Bridge. Now, the show at its core isn't just about showing the biggest and the tallest and the deepest and so forth, but rather it's about actually getting onto the buildings and physically understanding the how and the why, how the engineers and builders ultimately execute these projects and why they look the way they look. One of the things that we feel very strongly about is understanding how is a building inextricably tied to its place. The culture, the climate, the economic context, the sociology, and so forth. How is architecture a direct result of the place in which it's built? A project we did in Shanghai, for those who've been there recently, this is the Shanghai Tower. It's the third of the 3 towers in Pudong in downtown Shanghai. It is the tallest building in China at 2,000 feet tall. And this is an image of us filming the episode. And as you can see, while China has great innovations, they are still waiting on OSHA to arrive. Just for background, that's the Shanghai World Financial Center. The building looks like a bottle opener. That's 1,650 feet tall. And we're looking down on that building. So that's about 2,000 feet tall. And they're looking forward to getting harnesses at some point in the near future. In addition to being in front of the camera, I've had the opportunity to spend some time behind the camera. And a few years ago, got to create a documentary series with Steven Spielberg and the Discovery Channel called Rising, Rebuilding Ground Zero, which is a 6-part film that looked at each of the major projects at the World Trade Center site, explaining, again, not just how these buildings were built, but why do they look the way they look? What meaning is embedded in the design of these buildings that make them inextricably tied to the event of 9/11 and also the development of a new Manhattan? And just by way of example, one of the episodes looked at Santiago Calatrava's transportation hub. Now, who's been to this building here? Who's seen it in New York? Been through it, right? Amazing, slightly overpriced, but very beautiful building in downtown Manhattan. But have you asked yourself as you walked by it, why does it look the way that it looks? Said more specifically, look at the wings on this building. Pretty asymmetrical, right? Why go to the trouble to design a $4.5 billion train station, crank the building off the New York City axis, which produces asymmetrical ribs in the ceiling? Why do that? Any thoughts? Anyone? Seemingly arbitrary, right? Very expensive choice. Well, if you look at the building, you can see it's been cranked at a slight axis, thereby putting it too close to its neighboring building to the left, which produces short ribs on one side and very long extended ribs on the other side, which is beautiful. Now, the reason the ribs are cranked the way they were is because this isn't just a train station, but it's the transportation hub at the World Trade Center site. And so while every day during the year these beautiful shadows come into the space, they wanted a memorial in light, one that could never be changed. And if we remember 9/11, the sky was so blue and clear that day. And so every year, heretofore at 8:55 a.m., which was the time at which the first plane hit the first tower, when you enter this building, instead of seeing shadows as you do at an angle, but every single year for just a moment, shadows inside of this building will be symmetrical down the center of the spine of the building just for that moment, and then it will go on the rest of its day. Now, that was a very, very expensive gesture to produce and a really kind of complicated rotation of a building to produce that singular moment. But in a building this significant at a site that important, that's the choice that was made. And so I say that just to say embedded stories and embedded logic inside of architecture is what gives folks like us and folks who are not in the business an opportunity to connect to these buildings and have a relationship with them. And that has never been more important than in the case of a hotel. Now, in terms of the work that we do architecturally, which is what I'm going to talk about today, my practice does a wide range of work from cultural buildings. This is a museum of environmental history in the Seychelles. This is a museum of ethnography in Budapest. This is the first building in a very large 11 million square foot master plan in downtown Charlotte called First Ward, which is under construction right now. We do housing and a whole host of stuff, but our practice is really focused on hospitality the past, say, 7 or 8 years. Recently, as Michael mentioned, with the acquisition of Starwood and the Marriott merger, we were really honored to be invited to take the ALOFT brand, a 10-year-old hotel brand, and reimagine it, create a new prototype, and relaunch it. And actually, we're building now the first brick and mortar one right now, but all ALOFTs are part of the Generation 4. This is a design that we created. But what I want to talk about is take a slightly deeper dive into 3 projects right now, 3 hotels in New York City, and really talk about our journey to modular. Not to say that it's the greatest thing, it's faster, it's cheaper, it's the future, everything's fine, but to kind of show you kind of how we honestly came to arrive at being modular architects and be kind of candid about the struggles that got us there. This is a project we completed about 2 years ago. Very proud of the building. It's the World Trade Center Courtyard Marriott. Won the Alice Award for Best Development 2 years ago. Sold shortly after its opening. Kind of interesting, compelling building just south of Tower 1 of the World Trade Center. So there's Tower 1, there's Tower 4. Just south of Tower 4, if you look, there's our site. So we like to think of ourselves as Tower 4.5. And I say that kind of affectionately in the sense that for us, it was a real important opportunity, yes, to create a great hotel, but to find a way to connect this building to the master plan of the World Trade Center site and make it part of that campus. And the way we did that was, in a sense, saying the World Trade Center ends here. And we literally designed the building to have a very austere stone south facade that said, that's old Manhattan and that's new Manhattan. And there's our building that defines that southern edge of the campus. You can see it right there, quite literally. We've got kind of relentless square windows on one side and a very, very different facade to the other side. So the building sort of speaks 2 languages. Old New York to one side, then a very dramatic, crisp, taut window wall looking to the north. You'll notice the building cantilevers over its adjacent neighbor, which for those of you who build in tight urban areas, we oftentimes come up with crazy gymnastics to get an additional room into the plan, right? We call it FAR, floor area ratio, but at the end of the day is how much real estate can I squeeze onto the site to raise the profitability of the building. It's that simple, right? So if it means hanging your building 12.5 feet over your neighbor, if it's structurally reasonable, it actually makes sense. So we did things like that. One of the challenges with this building was that in New York City, and like many cities, there are complicated and esoteric zoning laws that make it difficult to design hotels, right? In the case of New York City, in this specific area, the podium of the building, the first 65 feet of the building, New York City said, you cannot set the building back, you must hold the street wall. Because they don't want deep, deep sidewalks. They want an active street life. So New York City said, you must hold that street wall for 65 feet. Then you can set the building back. Once you set the building back, it makes for a nice, slender, elegant, good, efficient hotel tower. But the problem was our podium, right, the first 5 stories of the building were really fat. And big, fat, long hotel rooms don't make more profitable hotel rooms. They just oftentimes can be wasted space. And quite specifically, if you look at the plan of our rooms here on the south side of the tower, we ended up with a queen-queen or a double-double condition that had a 345 square foot room, which I'll be honest with you, in New York City, it's too big. We get away with murder. I mean, we've got the Bowery Hotel here, right? The Pod Hotel, you can get away with 86 square foot hotel rooms. But my point here is the argument was made that could we find a way to compress the hotel room, to actually pull that room back and not use up that real estate? Well, the problem was it's against the law. So what do? We chopped that bit of real estate off just a little bit here from the west side of the building, and we said, okay, if we just took that real estate, that 3,500 square feet, and we yanked it off the building, reshaped it, put it on top of the building, set the building back, you could create an amazing rooftop experience with a triangular outdoor space with an incredible view of the World Trade Center memorial pools. That would be great. The problem is, we've just broken the law because the city says you must hold the street wall. The problem is the city also says if you put a wall there with a hotel room behind it, that's not legal light and air, that's not a hotel room. So our challenge was, how do you produce something that is both a window to one group and a wall to another? Literally two diametrically opposed things. And what we came up with was this. It's an algorithmically generated cantilevered screen wall made up of mesh. The mesh is 50% opaque and 50% transparent. There's 50% coverage of the mesh, therefore 50% open. So one group said you can't be more than 50% covered. One group said you have to be no less than 50% covered. Turns out we had one solution that satisfied both groups. It's an interesting, bizarre way to wrap the bottom of a building. Produces a kind of interesting design. Each and every single piece was subtly shifted such that every operable window still has clear access, so you can still take your Instagram photos. And in some cases, you could make the argument that it's a kind of interesting architectural detail from inside of the rooms. Now, I showed this just to say that it worked. It took 6 months. If you try and apply for a screen wall in Manhattan right now, the Department of Building has like my face on the wall and will say no. And I say that because this is a bit of a kind of a unicorn, right? We did it once. We as architects were able to make a good building that followed zoning, that helped our owner to get more additional FAR, add rooms, add a rooftop bar. So as architects, we could participate in the process beyond just making it beautiful or effective or operationally sound. But this is hardly something I can do a second time, right? We did it once. So how do we then, as architects, find a way to contribute in the process to the bottom line beyond just making the building work? We had a similar experience on another tower we did. This is a project we're working on in the Hudson Yards, mega $10 billion development right now on the west side of Manhattan. Once again, very, very tall buildings. Ours is a kind of tall building off to the side, but it still has a lot of heart. Very slender, very bizarre four-facaded building. It's about a 350-foot tall, really skinny building. This is going to be the Hudson Yards autograph for Marriott. And it's an interesting building. It's got kind of beautiful, large, upper double-height space in the top of the building, great views out to the west, interesting flipped-up column on the corner to create a double-height looking northbound. But at the bottom of the building, what we ended up doing was actually literally removing as much real estate as we could to have as small a footprint as possible when the building met the ground, so we could then take that real estate, as I talked about, and redistribute it to the top of the building. And nowhere is that more dramatic at the entry of the building, where instead of having a canopy, we literally have a missing tooth of the building, a sort of missing leg of the stool, where you move under a double cantilever 20-foot tall, 28-foot long entry to come into the space. All of that is a preamble to say this. When we inherited the site, and these were the dimensions given to us, 42 feet wide by 120 feet long, and the developer didn't have the ability to have windows on that side. So in a sense, it's a three-facade building, right? It's a three-facade building. It's 42 feet wide. It'll be a cast-in-place concrete building. From that moment, when those three decisions were made, my hands were kind of tied. Yeah, we could do good things. We could value engineer the curtain wall. We could have clever ways to make it work. But when you look at that guest floor plan and you see where the elevators are, the stairs are, the rooms are, the size of the rooms, the corridor, I'd like to say I had a lot of flexibility to make a really good plan, but I didn't. And the logistics of the site and the size of the site and the methodology of building it drove the entire process and the budget of the building. And we're grappling with this project's budget for that very reason. So as an architect, you're kind of frustrated. You wish you could do more. And in this case, building it as we did, we couldn't. We did the best that we could. Now, modular, of course, would make a lot of sense for a lot of different reasons. And I had been curious about modular for a very long time. I've actually been working on a new TV show about modular, but this is the kind of what the kind of modular America does, where wood frame, single family home, we've got a great history in this country of doing wood frame modular. This is one of those shows where you meet the family, they tell you what they want, we design a house for them, we tell them it's going to be great, we show them the house, I tell them how good it is, they agree. We then build it in just a matter of weeks. A truck comes to the house, we drop the core down. This is quite cool. In this core, you have all the MEP, literally all the infrastructure in one shot. The bathrooms and the kitchen click into it. The very same day, we stack up a series of walls, and then 14 weeks later, you have a house. It's great, totally cool. And that works. And in America, we've done this for quite a while. We've got different companies with different kind of capabilities for wood frame modular, and it's been very successful. Now, in the work that a lot of us do when you get above the kind of concrete podium 4-story building for high-rise urban infill development, wood frame is not an option. So if you're interested in doing high-rise multifamily architecture and you want to be looking at the steel volumetric modular, America has not had a very deep level of experience in that area. There are a few projects, and there's some folks in the audience who have spoken and worked on some of these projects. For those of you who know this, this is the Dean Street residential building attached to the Barclay Center in Brooklyn, New York. First high-rise modular project in America, 900 units, kind of an ambitious way to start. And in today's talk, for the Q&A, I'll be happy to talk about each one of these, and there's pros and cons to how all these projects went, but they struggled. They weren't all, let's say, grand slams. As you can see the building being erected here. This is the Pod Hotel, and again, we have folks who've worked on the Pod Hotel in the audience today. It's completed, it's open, a lot of challenges, a lot of issues in producing this building, but there it sits and it looks great. This is the Citizen M we heard about as well in the Bowery today. Actually, my office looks at this building. This building, I think, recently opened, right? So it's open for business at this point. Again, a project that had a lot of different challenges and come into fruition. So why, given all of the different challenges, would we endeavor to do a building that is yet taller, more complex, and potentially more risky? And the reality is we believe deeply in this as a methodology, but we also want to be honest with the fact that it's really complicated to do. It's very, very challenging. It takes a reimagination of how you put buildings together from beginning to end. So what I'll do kind of briefly is take you guys through this project. This is 842 6th Avenue at 6th Avenue and 29th Street in Manhattan. It will be the tallest modular building in the world. Right now it is being manufactured in Poland. In Krakow, we've got about 120 some odd of the rooms in construction, nearing completion. They'll be kind of on their way in a boat back to America in January. In New York City, we're building foundations as I speak. So this is an interesting moment in time. We're right in the middle of the project, kind of design is wrapped up. We're now in the administration process. So there's the building, and there it stands. First thing you'll notice is that it's hopefully decent looking, but the first thing you'll notice is that it's actually quite conventional in some respects. You've got a very tall 3-story podium and a tower that rises behind you, cranked at a 14-degree angle. That angle, I will promise you, is due to very esoteric zoning requirements in order to create light and air opportunities. It's not an aesthetic gesture. But if you look at the tower, really in very simple terms, from a modular standpoint, it is exactly what you want in a modular project. Why? The podium of the building is built in New York. The top of the building is built in Poland, right? And I say that because the programmatic breakdown of the building is specific to the methodology, right? By that I mean, in the bottom of the building, where you're building in New York and you're building out of concrete, go nuts, have at it, right? Your amenities program, your back of house program, your idiosyncratic program, your unrepeatable program, double height ceilings, slope ceilings, indoor, outdoor spaces. We are totally unconstrained, right? We can design as we've always designed and make an amazing, compelling public space with great food and beverage opportunities. That's fine. But when you rise above that transfer slab, as you see right there, the building becomes relentlessly repeatable, as absolutely automated as possible. You want that building to be tuned to be fabricated in a shop. From a facade standpoint, you'll also notice there's as you look at the building, there's a kind of a variegated metal facade. You've got a stone facade to the south and a stone facade on the podium. But when you look at this building, the question I'd ask all of you is, does it look modular? If I'd said to you it's a modular building and I showed you that beforehand, would you have known? One of the things we feel very strongly about is that, at present anyway, modular doesn't actually have, in this room, we all think it's a buzzword. Outside of this room, people think it's a mobile home. And that optics break is a real issue at this point. So from a kind of optics standpoint, we firmly believe this should be read legibly as an iconic piece of great architecture. It should be a great hotel. It should be amazing property, irrespective of how we built it. When you've gone through the hotel experience, we'll tell you how we built it, and we hope you giggle. You can't believe it's true. Now, the way in which we're able to break down what is oftentimes the critique of modular, which is that it looks like a bunch of stacked boxes, is twofold. Number one, you'll see the facade starts out as a kind of a dark metal, and as it rises up, that metal gets slightly brighter and whiter. The idea, it's a sort of optical forced perspective. The building seems taller than it is. But we do this specifically because, and this is an image of the Bowery Hotel being stacked, when you stack the boxes, the way our buildings are designed, the mate line work, they get bolted to each other on the face. So as the building gets stacked pod by pod, a scaffolding follows the building, and workers quite literally will bolt each module together. You do the waterproofing, you do the flashing. Well, that's also an opportunity to clip on a little bit of a slab cap cover as you would in a window wall system. So it gives us the opportunity to clad the building and let it read like a piece of architecture separate from that of a modular building. But it also gives us both belt and suspenders because we get additional waterproofing coverage. Now, from the tower of the building, what's important to note here, as you can see, is it is rigorously symmetrical. And I'll be honest, this building did not start out as a modular building. We actually were designing this building conventionally, and which is, I wouldn't recommend it. If you're doing modular, start modular. But we had been designing buildings before. That Hudson Yards building had been such a complicated building with so many facade types and such fussy geometry. We wanted to create something really simple and clean just for our own sanity. And it lent itself, as you can see, to a modular opportunity. The rooms, as you can see, they copy each other at the corners. They're not even mirrors. They're just rotated versions of themselves. Now, if you look at what's colored in red here, that is what we build in New York City, and everything else is what we build in Poland. So the structural spine of the building, the elevators, the stair towers, and a very slender piece of corridor space is cast in concrete. And as you'll notice, the hotel rooms come with their own corridors, which is a very common strategy for modular. So if you look at a king room right here, just as an example, here you can see the rooms. So HSS, so people always say, is it a container ship? It's not. It's a bespoke steel object, HSS steel tube, structural steel on all 6 sides of the building. The mechanical systems, the facade, the FF&E, the ID, everything is in this thing before it leaves the factory, right? But you'll also notice that the corridor comes with it as well, which is a critical piece of the puzzle. So if we kind of look at this and take a slightly deeper dive, a few things to take note of. Number one, there's no mechanical shafts in the body of the room, right? When you design a modular building, you pull all of the mechanical infrastructure to the corridor located here and here. Now, why do we do that? Because when that thing leaves the factory, the door is locked. When I say the door is locked, I mean it's actually locked. The GC on site doesn't get a key. So when the mechanical contractors, or the electrical contractors, the plumbers arrive, they take the elevator, they walk into the hallway, they make their connections, and then they bugger off. They're not actually allowed into the room. So the mate line work happens in the corridor. So the room is finished in Poland, but the corridor is finished in New York later. So they can have as muddy a boot as they want. It doesn't make a difference. They make those connections there. Now you'll also notice the aspect ratio, the geometry of, I have a laser? No. The aspect ratio of the shafts are quite skinny. Now that actually isn't designed specifically to fit the pipes perfectly. It's actually designed to fit someone's back and reach more comfortably. The most critical mate line work that's happening is connecting the plumbing of one to the plumbing of the next. And oftentimes you'll see on some of these projects, the shafts are quite deep, which means the men and women working on them are actually reaching quite far, oftentimes having to tie off. By compressing the width of the shaft space, that means the mate line work is happening directly next to your eyes. You're not tying off. You're able to really get your hands around the work. The width of the building, yes, of course, it's designed to fit a bed and be a great hotel room, but it's also designed to be optimized to be stacked 4 wide in a ship. When we ship this building, the entire building comes in one shot. And so by being 11 foot 8 inches, that allowed us, as we stack across the divide, to optimize it for shipping. So you're making decisions with the design of the building that are based upon shipping, turning radius of trucks, the allowable width the Department of Transportation lets you have on the Manhattan Bridge, the reach of a person installing a pipe shaft. And these kind of, we'll call them limitations or constraints, become the driving force that helps shape the design of the building, of course separate from all the brand requirements. Now, what I'm showing you here are our manufacturing drawings. And so a couple things to note. If you think about the typical life cycle of any project you've all worked on, the prototype that we build for this building happens during the back end of SD, the kind of beginning of DD. So just to kind of get your mind around that, you're still figuring out the building in very generic and kind of broad terms. And simultaneously, your team has to be at a point where they're making decisions at this level and creating documentations of this specificity. So it is a complete shift in how you think about your labor force and your time when you're organizing a building like this. And I say this also to be clear that we're not just talking about the building being designed loosely, we're talking about full mechanical coordination 3-dimensionally happening in each. Because when you build a prototype, it's not an aesthetic mock-up, it's a functional prototype. It could be the first room. So in this case, the Mitsubishi VRF system. So your mechanical engineers have to be this specific and this final at this point in time. So this gets us to the first challenge of modular. Having to make hard choices that are expensive early in the process and having to build consensus among people who haven't done this before. It's really hard. So if we could jump to a browser for a minute, I want to show you guys a technology that we developed for this project, which we now use for other projects. It was a way to kind of help us help our developer and help us make decisions, get brand on board, and think about the financial realities you have to commit to at a much earlier point in the process. So if we could jump to the browser, please. So what you're looking at, and we heard earlier today there was some talk. Oh, can we throw it on the main screen or no? We heard some talk earlier about using VR and so forth, and VR is great. We love VR. So if we just kind of look here for a minute. So this is the guest room. And so you can kind of fly around here. Gillis, if you would, just give us a little tour of the space here. You can see the room, good-looking room, bed, TV, facade, FF&E bits, some custom art. This is the specific piece of art on the wall. And so you're looking at the room to a T. And so VR is quite common. Many architects use it. Many folks use it. Good visualization tool. But for us, we weren't just saying, does it look good? We had to figure out, what does it cost, and can we specify everything and get it bought on time given the schedule? So if you roll your mouse over, you'll see things kind of start to light up. So if we click that for a minute, That's the chair. One of the things we're always concerned about is the spec doesn't get followed, right? We all know that struggle. So here what we've done is we've taken the spec, because we're all in Revit, everything's in 3D, and we've embedded the spec, which is otherwise a big old stack of PDFs, right? We've embedded the spec and the Revit model into the VR, so anyone in looking through this thing can feel the room, taste the room, but also a specifier can really be sure they're buying exactly the right thing. If we jump out of here, and so every single item, if you roll your cursor over it, you'll see lights up with its spec. That's fine. But one of the other issues is making decisions financially, because the room you're choosing, you can't make changes later. I mean, you can, but it's a nightmare. So you have to get your ownership group to commit 1,000% to these products, to this design at a very early point. Remember, we're kind of at like early DD. So Gilles, if we just look at the front door for a minute. So here, if you look at the door, you've got this nice wood panel and this nice ceiling panel. The question was, is it worth the money? Is that entry experience, does it require that wood wrapping ceiling there? So if we kind of look up for a minute, that's great, just kind of pan up for a sec. And if we click on VE for a minute, on the bottom, you can see we embedded some of the options that we were studying. So if we click on, let's say, ceiling detail, because in modular, you have the cost of everything at the top of the project because you have priced this thing, right? Because you have to go into manufacturing. You are able to look in real time at the cost. So if we take the door panel off as well, you can simultaneously understand the architectural, the guest experience, and the financial implications. And we spin back over to the bed, Giles, if you just pan over to the bedroom, you can see that wall panel behind the bed was also a big item in question. If you pause there, thanks, advance forward, that too can get pulled off the room as well. So as you can click on the wall panel there, remove that, and so on and so forth. So you can get the gist, right? And if you just close that up for just a moment and click on specifications, to the left, yeah, perfect. And hit view all. So every piece of the spec is embedded into the VR. So it's just it's slightly clumsy, but it's, we built it for this project. It's not like an out product, but it gives you a sense of how you can take your spec book, you can take the architectural vision, and you can then say to your ownership group, this is what you're building. You can give this VR out to your contractors as well as to the modular fabricators and say, does it look like this? Because as we heard earlier, those 2D drawings are great, but when you fly, in our case, when you fly 25 people out to Krakow to review this thing, you're making commitments that once you say go, 168 of them are being made shortly thereafter. So getting that model room right, there's a little less flexibility than normal projects. That's great. If we could jump back to the PowerPoint, that'd be wonderful. So this is just one of the tools that we developed to deal with, I would say, one of the two major issues, which is having to make choices earlier and committing to those choices. And a tool like this allowed us to get us, ownership, brand, and all the consultants in lockstep at an earlier point in time. Now, so what did it produce? So what I want to show you here is actually the prototype that was ultimately built. So we're well ahead in fabrication, but in November of last year, our team, Marriott, and a whole host of folks flew out to Krakow to review the prototype. So this was a queen and a king room space, and you can see the prototype there. Facade is on the building. The cladding, now this is a little bit deceptive. We actually will apply these panels. This is a cementitious RAINSCREEN panel. That'll get hung in New York City, but the girts, the exterior insulation, the waterproofing, all of that happens in Krakow, and then they just clip the panels on in New York. And you can see that's a very simple off-the-shelf product called EQUITONE. Looks great. We happen to rotate that panel. You can see here, each panel rotates actually in the same order. Every time a window panel switches, this switches as well, giving the building a bit of scale despite the height of the stone wall. You can see that there. So this is the rendering, right? This is what comes out of the virtual reality, and then this is what we ultimately manufactured. So this is the prototype, just to kind of give you a sense, a taste for how it works. All the art, all the pieces, everything you see is what we're getting, 168 of. Now, one of the challenges now, once you go to this point and you look at your prototype and you kick the tires and you're comfortable with it, construction administration is really tricky when you're in New York and someone's in Krakow, right? So then that's problem number 2 in modular is how do you QA/QC a project that's quite far away? Some domestically built projects are good, but at this point in time, there are not that many manufacturers in the States who can do projects of this height and size out of steel. So what do you do? So if we could jump back to the browser, if you don't mind, the second piece of technology we co-developed for this project, which is what we're doing is we are using 360 technology, which many people are doing, 360 cameras, and stitching them together, but using time, right? Because it's really about time. So if we jump to the other vista, yeah, great. If we just jump into the room, you can go close. So this is Krakow, all the way to view 5 if you don't mind. And these are the prototypes being built. And so what we do is, based upon the VR, we then locate cameras based upon, you can see these 5 specific views. And then at 4 stages during construction of all 168 modules, and you can sort of pan around a little bit, what you're looking at is a 360 time lapse. So you can rotate in time and see the building get built. You can see the spec is all fully embedded into the cameras as well. So you're able to see the thing, so we can see it at steel, we can see it at rough-in, we can see it at sheetrock, and we can see it when the FF&E comes in. But what's nice about that, more importantly, is that you can pick any mod at any point in time and peel back that wall. So that also then becomes an opportunity for facilities management after construction is done. So this is just, obviously nothing beats getting on a plane and getting there and looking at the stuff, which we are, of course, doing. But this has been a really critical tool to help us to keep everyone honest and to manage the repeatability and QA/QC. So you can kind of get a sense of how that works. And this is where we sit about 4 weeks ago. We had about 108 modules in the factory at that point. We had just beginning our stacking tests, which is always encouraging to know it stacks. And as I said, we're going to be bringing them back to America in January. Now, I will say one quick thing, and hopefully it'll look something like this, perhaps a little less dramatic, but hey, it's a rendering. I will say this, we are fully engaged in this process. This is a project we're working on right now in Brooklyn. It will be the tallest modular hotel in Brooklyn. And I showed this just to make the point that this isn't a fluke and that this isn't a one-off, and the folks in the room who are also doing this kind of work can commit to the fact that there are practitioners very engaged in modular construction. This is the project in Brooklyn. And we're also working on a project on the island of Nevis right now, which will be, as Michael mentioned, the first 5-star modular hotel in the world as well. A project called the Nevetian. And there it's about 160 key hotel right there, as well as hybridly built modular villas that are going to be half built on site and half built modularly. And you can see that project right there. And I show this just to wrap things up to make the point that these are very large and very fancy rooms. These are 5-star rooms. In some cases, we're combining 3 modules together to create very, very elegant suites with kitchens and large bathrooms and moving walls and balconies and outdoor spaces and plunge pools as well. It's crazy, it's really interesting, but my point is that you are not limited by any means. The technology doesn't determine what you build or how you build it. The technology is wildly flexible. It just takes an insane amount of coordination to get it done. I would say this, that I know people always ask, is it cheaper, is it faster, is it better? It's all of those things if done right. It's an unmitigated mess if it's not. And we don't have that many feathers in our cap at this point to say that this is the holy grail. It will be, but it will take time. It will be all the more effective when we have domestic manufacturers in America. I spoke last week at the Build America Summit in DC at the Library of Congress with Congressman Donald Payne and Elijah Cummings, who are very engaged in looking at ways to bring subsidies in America to find ways to bring manufacturing back to America. And modular is an area where there's a ton of excitement about it. So there is a groundswell of activity. People are talking about it. It will require developers and folks in this room to support this effort, because at the end of the day, it gets better for all of us if we all do this and work hard to succeed at that. So with that, I'm going to pause and take any questions.
In terms of the design phase, at what point have you settled on which company you use for technology?
Very, very early. What we did when we decided to flip the building to modular, we basically paused the job, took almost about a 6-month due diligence phase where we vetted, we looked at all the projects I showed you today, we met with all the manufacturers, all the fabricators, and basically once that decision was made, the general contractor and the modular fabricator were selected at the same time. So there's no bidding. It didn't go that way at all. It was a sort of a deep due diligence phase for us. A decision was made. And then at that point, it's basically IPD, integrated project delivery. I mean, your architect, your GC, and your modular manufacturer are a team. We don't say design build in New York City because it's not legal, but in practical terms, it's a design build job. Yes, sir. That's correct. So there's 2 methodologies to modular high-rise. The one that we're proffering here is you have a concrete core that functions as your elevators and your fire stairs. That's also the lateral bracing. So the modules themselves are steel buildings that they can hold themselves up, but they can't take wind load, and they can't take lateral. So they bolt back into the core, and they bolt into each other, which gives them their lateral strength. An alternative methodology is a brace frame system, whereby you can build the stairs and the elevators out of steel frame, have no concrete in the job, and then it's just a rigid steel frame building. Both are available. Both have kind of pros and cons, and there are folks doing both right now. Right, which is, so the cruise ship methodology is like what you're seeing here. So the kind of the core is there and you snap the mods in. There is another way of doing it where you don't deal with the challenges of concrete likes to go this way, steel likes to go this way. Sometimes they don't meet happily together. But I'll tell you, like everything, lessons learned. I mean, on the Bowery project, they cast their entire core top to bottom first, and then the mods came later. Well, lo and behold, you know, concrete has a tendency to creep, and that can be challenging. On our project, one of the lessons learned we have is we cast our core progressively. So the core goes up 4 stories, we pause, we stack 4 stories, we pause, let the building settle. Cast the core 4 stories, pause, stack the mods, and pause again. You know, these are things that slow the job down, and modular is all about speed, but of course, any project the schedule falls to pieces if you're messing with the embeds in the concrete because they don't line up. So this methodology brings on the challenge of concrete, but there's also some good things come with it as well.
I don't know if you can speak to the manufacturing side.
Sure.
What are the challenges with bringing manufacturing to the States? Is that the modular that's being done in wood, are those the same facilities that will be, or
No.
they're not going to be?
I mean, some of the big wood guys are likely going to be acquiring some of the steel factories in America, so we'll see what's going to happen. So, but you're asking about overseas?
I'm asking, how soon do you think we'll see that manufacturing in the States?
Well, so there are companies. I mean, there's Full Stack in Brooklyn, there's Deluxe in Pennsylvania, there's a company in Austin. I mean, there are modular companies right now in America doing volumetric steel buildings. They exist. They haven't gone very tall yet, and things get tricky when you get tall. So it's not that they can't do it. I'm sure their brochure says they can go to the moon. You know, the question is, are you going to put your money down and feel comfortable, right? So it's about building that skill set. So they're here right now. I mean, Citizen N can speak to why they went to Poland. We can talk about why we went to Poland. But I think it's happening now because there simply isn't the comfort level. But my sense is that's changing every day. But you can ask yourself, too, the cost savings on the labor relative to the cost of shipping, gosh, that's a huge number you've got to make up, which at this point it does pencil. But very, very soon, that's not going to be the case.
What's the warranty like when you look at all the trades combined within a modular unit?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's no different than you would. You require the same things of your FF&E providers and your ID providers and your GCs as you would in a regular project. So there's nothing different in that regard. You have to structure your contracts the right way. I mean, we were very fussy in our project to make sure that the general contractor is the modular fabricator, that they're one and the same, that you don't have sort of GCs and subs in that respect, which at least helps in terms of finger pointing and responsibility matrices. But at the end of the day, it's a GC who's delivering our product.
Assuming all of your coordination goes as it should, how does the cost compare to conventional?
You know, I think everyone has a kind of different statement about this. At this point in time, if we can be cost neutral and faster, that's my goal. I would say there are qualitative value adds that may not be obvious. I mean, let's say one. On our project, 80% of the real estate is modular, right? You have price certainty on that at very, very early point in the process. So just in terms of your budgeting process, the amount, if you look at our building, right, the podium's 8,000 square feet, the tower's 75,000 square feet. We know the cost of that. That's very helpful. Also in terms of just contingency management, think about, for those of you who build hotels on a regular basis, think about how much gets destroyed during the process. So that kind of QA/QC process pre-opening, you can compress that timeline because that door really does stay locked. So if the mate lines are managed outside of the keys, you pick up a lot of time on the back end. So there's lots of sort of hidden value at this point. I would say on a dollar for dollar basis for us right now, I don't anticipate major savings. Right now we're trying not to mess up, right? We're trying to get this right.
Danny, so
Yes.
when you started all this, one of the things you said is very, very early you've got to have contractor, architect, owner in lockstep. How in corporate structure in the US do you do that and not have the 3-bid process? What did you do to get past that?
Say again, to get past.
Corporate America typically says, I need a 3-bid process. Well, to do what you're talking about,
Yeah.
you have to combine all of these people together in trust before you've actually designed enough to actually price it.
I think you said the key word. I think trust is really critical. I think the leap of faith that's required to be sending lots of money very early to a place far off requires a deep amount of trust. I think the general relationship between the A&E team and the contractor team, which is inherently adversarial, that entire paradigm has to be gone for this, because there is so much support that each group has to do for the other group. If you're thinking about it, like in our world of kind of, it wasn't in the drawings change order world, that just has to be gone. Like these projects will crumble under their own weight if that's the methodology you're using. I mean, I can say that of the many projects we have in our office right now, we have meetings for this project and we've got meetings for every other project. And this one truly, it feels unlike any of our other work right now because of that way. So it just, we don't bid it the same way. You bring a team on, you trust, and you work the number as a group. Thanks very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Danny.